Shevii of Parshas Naso tells us about the sum total of the carbonot that the various Nesi'im, the 12 Nesi'im, brought. And if there is a question, and there certainly is, about the Torah's repetition over and over again of the same details of the karban, of the offering at the dedication of the Mishkan, each Nasi does the same thing, and yet it's spelled out for each Nasi individually, the same thing over and over and over again. In fact, 72 psukim that are essentially repeating themselves over and over and over again. And when we come to Shevii, we have a further problem, because by this time we understand what exactly Nasi 1, 2, and so on through Nasi 12 brought. And since they brought the same thing, one of this and one of that, and so on and so forth, we know that to gain the sum total of what was brought, we simply multiply the 1 by 12. And yet, Shevii, when we come to Shevii, we are told that Zot Chanukat HaMizbeach, this was the Chanukah of the Mizbeach that the Nesim brought, and then we have another psukim that tell us exactly the sum total of everything, and that continues for another number of psukim. So the question is, what are we being told here? What are we to learn from this? The answer to this, perhaps, is contained in a Rashi, who comments on the beginning in Balotcha, when Aaron is told to be in charge to light the menorah day after day after day, and we are told Vayas Kain Aaron. Aaron did exactly as he was told, and he did as he was told. And Rashi, well-known Rashi says, Vayas Kain Aaron lahagid shvacho shel Aaron. This is to tell me the praise of Aaron, shelo shina, that he did not change. He did exactly what he was told. Well, in light of what the Nesim did, we begin to get a deeper understanding of this. Because after all, Nasi 2, certainly by the time of Nasi 7, you would say, well, that's been done before. I want to do something different. I'm moved. I'm spiritually moved. We've been there. We've seen that. What can I do to somehow be different? But no, over and over and over again. The same thing we are being told, this is a well-known observation about Aaron. Lahagid shvacho shel Aaron shaloshina, not that he didn't change what he was told, but he never repeated the same thing more. He never did it more than once. What does that mean? Of course he did the same thing. He followed the instructions as every Navi brought, as every Nasi brought the same carbon. But it was not an issue of same old activity by rote, but rather each time, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mechadesh betuvo b'chol yom tobid maaseh breshit, as God is said to renew creation, to create the world anew, as it were. So we do day after day the same thing. Aaron lit day after day. The Nasi just repeated, as it were, what the previous Nasi did, but it was new. It was different. He was different. To perform the same act with new energy, new verb, to make sure that the quotidian does not become mundane. That is something. That is even, perhaps, one might argue, more religious devotion and more passion. And here we have the answer to the question of why not simply the repeat of the individual Nasim, but why go through the whole, again, all the sum total. Because not only is the issue of repetition and the staleness of an act repeated and the inability to infuse it with new meaning and new life a problem for the individual who repeats an act, but it's a problem for the community. What do I mean by that? Because the issue of the life of a community is not simply a commonality that we're all doing the same thing, but the true true life of a community is not the common, but that of the commune. It is the oneness in spirit. It is the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. Yes, the sum of its parts of the crowd may add up to made up to 20,000 people in a stadium, but the crowd communes in such a way that it is more than the mere sum of 20,000 individuals. We find this, first of all, or most prominently, in Am Yisrael, that when they received the Torah, the receiving of the Torah was the standing before Har Sinai. They stood before Har Sinai, Vayichan Tachat Har, and the verb is in the singular. Of course, according to the Pshat, it's the collective noun in the individual, but in a wider sense, and this is what the Medrash means, they were like one person. The crowd became a oneness in itself, and that oneness is a different experience than a mere collection of individuals. And that the Nisim, even though each one did the same thing, but somehow all of this was an act on the part of all the Nisim together. And that made it more than the sum of its parts. We know what the sum of the parts of the Nisim. There were 12 of this and 12 of that, and so on and so forth. And nonetheless, it's more than the sum of its parts. And that is because there can be a person who does his individual acts and each one is new. And there is a person who is part of a group and each one is doing the same thing, but it is more than the simple sum of the number of people doing it. It is something new. It is something greater than that. And this communitality, if you will, this is part of the sense of what standing before Sinai it was, and what receiving the Torah is for the people of Israel, and of course what we are trying to engage in communal events. There is a difference between 9 people or 10 individual people davening and 10 people davening as a minyan. And that community of Am Yisrael is what is being expressed when we dedicate the Mishkan. It begins at Har Sinai. And when we leave Har Sinai, the Kedusha of the mountain, which was temporary, is now imbued in the Mishkan. And we are in the Mishkan as a community. And when the Mishkan no longer exists and the Beis Hamikdash takes its place, that takes part in the Beit Hamikdash. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant us the sense of newness, of community beyond the common, and raised to standing once again at Har Sinai and praying once again and dedicating once again in the Beit HaMikdash b'mheira b'yameinu.